Welcome to everyone here for our event today, a new resilience for Greater Brighton and Hove. This is part of the ABC Cultural Recovery Plan Igniter event, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. My name is Joanne Goodey, and I'm an associate of Always Possible, who are hosting today's event, and I'm going to be facilitating today's event with our speakers. This is a Zoom webinar, so you won't be able to come on mic to chat, but you can use a chat function for discussions, and please use a Q&A function for any questions you've got for our speakers. We're going to hold the questions to the end of the panel talk, so whilst the speakers are talking, if you've got questions, stick them in the Q&A, and we'll definitely come back and select those relevant questions to the discussion to talk about further at the end of the lightning talks today. And just to let you know that today's meeting is also going to be recorded. I just wanted to set the scene a little bit about why we're here and what these events are about. So in 2019, the creative cultural industries in Greater Brighton generated more than 1.5 billion in annual turnover. The number of people working in the businesses was 16,000 employees in over 6,100 companies. Brighton and Hove, as we probably all know, also has a large number of self-employed people working in the gig economy created by these creative businesses. The COVID-19 pandemic, however, was catastrophic for many of these companies and for freelancers. Many people found themselves without jobs, slipping through gaps in furlough and other business support. So in early 2020, universal credit claims by the self-employed in Brighton went up by 142% comparatively to 112% across the rest of the UK, which really shows you how big and important our creative sector and our freelance sector here in Brighton Hove is. So in the middle of this storm, with livelihoods threatened and organisations at risk of collapse, Brighton Hove's cultural and creative sector came together and participated in a number of conversations, out of which they drew this ABCD, Cultural Recovery Plan for Brighton and Hove. So today we're here as part of that recovery plan. This series of Igniter events is to help us reimagine the creative sector, how we can emerge from the pandemic stronger, more connected, and even more resilient. I've got the notes: brand new, bold, brave, and inspiring. And I should add, although these events were originally set up for the Greater Brighton area, we're here to share our experiences, ideas, learning. So we welcome everyone locally, nationally, and internationally to these events. Today's session will be focusing on how we can build resilience. What can be done to minimise damage and protect our future? How do we increase the understanding of the value of and the need to protect and develop our creative and cultural industries? To help us answer these questions and to share their own experiences and insights on cultural recovery, I'm joined by an incredible panel of artists, creatives, researchers, and cultural leaders. I think that covers everyone's expertise, hopefully, who are going to share some of their experiences, their insights, and their advice with us today. So I'd love to start by introducing our panel to you. And I will start with Dr. Sophie Cook. Sophie is a former parliamentary candidate, RAF veteran, writer, speaker, broadcaster, photographer, self-harm and suicide survivor, and transgender. Sophie became the first transgender woman to work in football's Premier League as a club photographer for AFC Bournemouth, following her transition from Steve to Sophie in 2015. Sophie is also the Equality and Diversity Officer for local football club Whitehawk FC, as well as managing the Rainbow Rangers affiliated LGBTQ+ team. Sophie has hosted her own TV and radio chat shows and is an experienced broadcaster, as well as giving talks on topics such as change, fear, vulnerability, diversity, and mental health. So Sophie, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you be able to give us a 30-second summary of what you might be talking about with us in your lightning talk?
I think you've just done a 5-minute summary of what I'm going to be talking about.
Sorry.
Basically,
your bio
I'm
right.
going to be yeah. I'm going to be talking. Well, apart from the football club, I manage Rainbow Rovers, not Rainbow Rangers.
Oh, sorry, I had that in my notes actually, and that was me just ad-libbing. I apologise.
That's fair. We'll have a good ad-lib. Basically, I'm going to be talking about how at the start of COVID, everyone was saying, "Oh, I can't wait to get back to normal," and actually, you know what? We needed to find a different place to be. So I'm going to be talking about that. I'm going to be talking about some of the lessons that I've learned over the last couple of years, and hopefully I've found a way forward for myself post-COVID, and hopefully that might give some people some ideas for their way forward as well.
Just realised I unmuted myself. Thank you, Sophie. That sounds fantastic. Next, I'd love to introduce Dave Moutrey. Dave is a Director and Chief Executive of Home, a purpose-built multi-art form venue that opened in 2015 in May in Manchester. Home has attracted almost 1 million visits per year since it opened. And Dave is also the Director of Culture at Manchester City Council, where he's responsible for advising the council on cultural policy and strategy, as well as working closely with the Cultural Leadership Group on joint working and other collaborative initiatives. Dave's worked in the arts in Manchester in leadership roles since the 1980s at the Abraham Moss Centre Theatre, Arts About Manchester and Corner House. Dave, it's fantastic to have you here today. I'm really looking forward to getting some of your perspectives and comparisons that you can bring from Manchester's creative industries and their cultural strategy as well. Would you be able to give us your 30-second summary of what you're going to be talking about today?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me, and hopefully I've got something that's worth listening to. I'm going to talk about how the cultural sector in Manchester came together and worked together during the pandemic, and continues to do so. And actually, it did that because of a history of working together across the sector. So that's it in a nutshell, I think.
Fabulous. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Josh Siepel. Josh is a senior lecturer at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex Business School, and he also leads on the AHRC Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre work on creative clusters, innovation and access to finance. Josh's research focuses on the intersection between entrepreneurship, skills and innovation, with a particular reference to the role of the creative industries and creative skills in the economy. His research has been widely recognised and referenced in publications including Forbes, HR Magazine and Arts Professional, some of the publications that some of our viewers might be reading themselves, and has been cited widely around the world. But I actually know that Josh is going to be talking about something a little bit closer to home today. So Josh, would you be able to give us your sort of 30-second summary of what you'll be talking about today?
Sure, of course. Thank you, Jo. Yes. So I'm going to be talking today about some of the research that we've been doing through our Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center on the impact of COVID on creative businesses, looking at it both in terms of the perspective across the whole of the UK, but then specifically talking about some information, some data that we've collected about the impact specifically on Greater Brighton, and talking about what that means for future resilience for creative businesses in the Brighton area.
Sounds fantastic. Thanks, Josh. And last but not least, we've got Nelson Navarro. Nelson is a Brighton-based artist, rapper and producer who also works locally to support and inspire young people. Their Afrofuturism music style is rooted in hip-hop and cutting-edge electronica, focusing on messages of positivity, empowerment and optimism. And I think they're going to bring some of that and empowerment and optimism to help us kick off the proceedings today. So Nelson, I'd love to hand over to you now to kick off today's lightning talks, if you're ready.
Thanks, man. I'm ready and raring to go. How are we doing, everybody?
A good way to start.
It's a real pleasure. I feel like I'm in very esteemed company. It's great to see this kind of thing. I think we're talking today about rebuilding. We're talking today about fortifying and learning how to come together in order to grow through these difficult periods. And I think even the nature of doing this sort of thing it's very appropriate, because this is, I think, as I'm going to kind of mention as I chat with you guys, that's been a really integral part of it for me as well, in terms of working with other people and learning how to really shake hands with people and how to really communicate with people and learn from people in order to get better, in order to be happy, which I think is a really important part of being able to rebuild and being able to be resilient, you know, to find happiness in those small moments. So let me share some slides here. Let's get techie. Let's see how this goes. Can we see that? Are we all right? If anyone in the chat can just let me know if they can see what's going on, and then we'll get on with that. Yeah, we can see you. Yeah, wicked. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Esther. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Brilliant. Well, like I say, thank you for everyone, you know, coming through today. It is a real pleasure, and it's a really exciting time. So I'm, as mentioned, I'm Nelson, and I've been working in the city for like the past like 5 years maybe. I'm from Worthing originally, and I started coming here when I was maybe like 19, and I met a bunch of great people and kind of realized like, this is a pretty cool place to be. It's a pretty cool place to be. And I've learned a lot since coming to the city and getting really involved in the culture of the entertainment culture here and the political culture here. And it's been really fantastic. And today I'm going to kind of show you how I went from this scruffy looking guy here. This is a really low quality photo, and it's actually a clip from a video that I'll show you guys in a second. To this, which is I was on stage at the Youth Music Awards, which is a real highlight of last year, coming out of lockdown into receiving an award for Creative Entrepreneur of the Year. That was a real surprise, and a lot of times in life there are real big surprises, and those are the ones that really, those are opportunities to really boss up and really learn. So I guess you kind of want to know who I am before before you kind of listen to me, you know, talk and tell you why my opinions are, you know, tell you what my opinions are. So I think, as you know, as was mentioned, I'm a musician. I've been here for a little while. I've been making music. I'm running a studio at the moment, and I think, as they say, picture paints 1,000 words. So what I do want to do is I want to show you guys a little video. If I do a very clever, another bit of technology, this full screen, hopefully we can all see that. Again, if anyone, if we can see it, just give me a little thumbs up, give me a little message in the chat. Can we see this little video here? Yes, we can. Brilliant. Okay, cool. So this is a little video taken from the last show we did. We threw a party called the Afrofuturist Landing Party, celebrated a bunch of music that we released last year at the Green Door store.
Have faith, go away, be so patient, be so patient. Have faith, go away, be so patient, be so patient. They wanna hold us down, I ain't gonna take it now. Been working way too hard, how I'm gonna lay in the ground. Been working way too hard, how I'm gonna lay in the ground. Been working way too hard, how I'm gonna lay in the ground. They wanna hold us down and I've seen it. Stay on my path and the route been scenic, I mean it. My journey been fire, I'm a phoenix, fall then I rise to defeat it. Crazy what I seen on the way, believe it. Cling to my dreams all day, I need it. I got a need to create, so I stand on the stage and I pray. Pray for a better life and I find I better work if I wanna climb. I'm sky high, never know what the limits are till I find I hit the top, see the bigger view in my mind's eye. And I search on myself, been a while since I cried a lot of tears in my soul, but I keep them inside and I lost my pros. Plus I got a lot of woes and I really don't know if I'm ever gonna fly, so I have faith, go away, be so patient, be so patient. Have faith, go away, be so patient, be so patient. I ain't gonna take it now, been working way too hard. How I'm gonna lay in the ground, been working way too hard. How I'm gonna lay in the ground, been working way too hard. How I'm gonna lay in the ground. How I'm gonna lay in the ground.
All right. There we go. That is, yeah, that was a little video for, yeah, for the show that we put on last year. And I think one of the reasons that I want to show you that, apart from just blowing my own horn and saying how great am I, how wonderful am I, is really just to show you in person, you know, paint a picture is 1,000 words, you know, and doing events has been a really big part of the music industry and something that we've really lost. Or maybe loss isn't the right word, but we've really had to combat, you know, over this last kind of period of having, you know, a whole lockdown of not being allowed out of our houses, not being able to congregate, so on and so forth. That being able to rejoin that and being able to come together and share that with people, I think is a massive contributor to being able to be resilient, to be able to come up with new ideas by interacting with people, by going and seeing people, and being entertained. You know, I think one of the biggest parts of being a resilient person and being able to keep striving when things get hard is to be able to find happiness in those small moments. You know, the phrase "count your blessings" comes to mind. And being able to put on parties like that, you know, we've got another one which I'll talk coming up, which we've just announced today, in fact, so the timing is brilliant, and I'll talk about that at the end. It's massive, I think, and I think we'll hear later on as well throughout the day of how the collaboration aspect of resilience is really, that's really the biggest thing, you know, and I'll go on about how I've kind of experienced that as well in my life. I can see I've got some stuff on my screen that is obscuring things. I really apologize. I'll have a look at that. If I can see it pop up, then I will rectify that. But hopefully we can, hopefully you guys can see what's going on. Okay, so a little bit about the kind of stuff that we're doing in terms of community building for young people. And this I think is really, really exciting. So this photo is taken from Bottega Rooms, which is a space on Lewis Road. We're a charity called Audio Active. And Audio Active last year, I think, served about 1,400 young people throughout Brighton, East and West Sussex, with free to access music sessions. And Audio Active is something that I've been involved in from basically as soon as I came to Brighton. They were providing a load of kids with the skills to express themselves through music. And it's just, it's so powerful to see it. I started going to these workshops when I was about 19 years old. And I've since having attended their workshops and learned from those skills and learned how to develop confidence and so on, and meet friends and develop a community to help support me and to help grow with. I've now started working with Audio Active. I started delivering those workshops to other people. And that's something that I really want to highlight, in a sense of being able to teach is sometimes put on a pedestal as something that is very illustrious and very, you know, you have to know a whole lot to be able to be a teacher. And actually, I would argue that all of us in here are teachers. We are all role models, and we are all capable of really catalyzing amazing change. And that's something that I really espouse in my music. That's something that I really espouse in my day-to-day. I run a podcast called Trust Your Journey, which is all about speaking to people and learning from them, learning from their anecdotes, learning from their stories, learning from their mistakes, learning from their successes, and understanding what is it about you that is the key, some of the keys to your success. I don't think there's any one key to anyone's success. I think it's all a bunch of factors, right? It's all a bunch of things coming together. And the way this relates to teaching is when you teach people, when you sit in front of people and you listen and you work out what they're struggling with, and you make an effort to understand that, and you show listening skills, you're doing something really important, which is showing your awareness, and you're showing someone that you care, and you're showing someone that they have value. You're demonstrating to someone that they have value. And if I go back to what we're doing with Audio Active here, the reason that this is powerful, the reason why helping young kids, especially young kids, with things like tools of expression, with self-confidence, and showing them role models, is because these are the people who grow up to then lead the charge. You know, we're talking about resilience today. And to be resilient, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of foundational investment. It takes a lot of time, as I'm sure a lot of us know. you can't just wake up in the morning and run a marathon. I mean, some people can, but those people who tend to do that kind of craziness, it's not something that I personally do. But it's an emotional game. And those emotional games really take a foundation. They take a wherewithal that is practiced over time. They take, it's discipline. Discipline and boundaries are two of the most foundational elements to being able to go through and have grit in the tough times. And that's something that I think that indirectly we're always showing people, whether it's through, actually teaching someone, I don't know, how to write a rap or how to write a piece of music, or if it's just listening to someone, and saying, and asking them questions and saying, how have you achieved these successes? Well done. The so-called grandmother syndrome, which I don't know if you guys have heard about, but is the grandmother syndrome, where the simple act of being able to present your work to someone who cares without need for criticism or critique, even when it is constructive, being able to display your achievements is really, really, really powerful. And I think the link between teaching and collaborative working is just unparalleled in helping people become resilient human beings. And let's face it, as a community, the more resilient we are individually, the more resilient we can be together. This is me here. This, again, I really apologize. Some of these pictures are a bit low res, but I feel like I'm getting the point across. This is actually a photo in where I'm sat right now, and this snazzy background might be hiding it. You can maybe see, I don't know, you can't see at the moment behind me, but this is a studio that I opened in May of last year, which was a massive turning point for me, because all of a sudden I had a place to work that was not my house. All of a sudden I had a place where I left the house to arrive and sit down and create. And that's a really, really wonderful thing. Not everyone can do that, and it took me a long time to get here. And the thing I really want to preach with this picture, I opened my doors thinking I was probably going to charge people for engineering, for coming into my studio. I can help you make a record. I'm a producer. I can record you. I can make some instrumentals for you, so on and so forth. And I'll make some money, and then I'll be able to pay for my studio. And actually, that's the opposite of what happened. Since I've opened this studio, the amount of people that I've charged to come and make music here is tiny. The amount of people that I've invited into this space with an open door policy and sat down with and had conversations with and collaborated with is enormous. And the thing that I think I've learned the most from all of this work is that everyone's story they have to tell. People are so resilient. People are going through crazy things. When they sit down in this chair next to me and we're here to make records, they have things that they want to get off their chest, just like they do in the podcast. And the conversations that you end up having with people and the things that they then put into their music or into their art, whatever form they have, into their culture, into their daily lives, is gorgeous. It's absolutely wonderful, and it's inspiring. And I think that's something that I really, really believe in, and I've learned, since over this period, is we can easily find ourselves thinking that we need more unnecessarily because we're unhappy with what we've got, or thinking that we need more because when we look at someone and we compare ourselves and we say, oh, that this person's doing so successful at such a young age or has achieved such wealth, in such a short amount of time. I'm really, it's not fair, right? And that's bitterness, and it's really corrosive. And what I've learned from opening these doors to my little spaceship here in Elm Grove, what I've learned here is that when you look at others and you're able to open your heart as well as your doors, and you're able to look at those people and say, there's something special about you. Just as there's something special about me, there is something special about all of us. I can learn from that, and I can allow myself to feel happy, not only for you, for someone who is succeeding. I can allow myself to feel happy that I know you, that I can see you, that I can interact with you, and to see that your story is possible. And if your story is possible, then mine can be too. Because Lord knows that there are times in life when we want to pack up and go home and quit. And sometimes we do pack up and go home. We don't necessarily quit, but we might go home and feel like we're worthless. And that's part of those dark nights of the soul of any journey worth taking. And I think what can happen, the way we can fortify, share and fortify, is by listening. by listening and growing and teaching ourselves and guiding ourselves and looking around us in our environments and taking those success stories to heart, and taking those success stories and saying, everything is possible. It's you know, to quote a great organization, it's always possible. You know, everything that we think of, it can be done. It's about your lengths you're willing to go to. It's about the determination you're willing to put in. And that really is where that resilience comes from, that determination and patience of making sure that you can go through those difficult times and you can stick it out, because it's really not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And when we say when, we mean it could be in 5 days, it could be in 5 months, it could be in 5 or 50 years. It depends how committed we can be to those individual moments, that journey. And as I say in this podcast, if I can even get back there, like I say in this podcast here, it's about trusting your journey, and it's about believing that you can. And the way to do that, look around you, take up in your environment, and enjoy yourself. Enjoy yourself on that road, and I think you'll be just fine. So thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. There's actually a bunch of stuff on here that I didn't quite get to, so if I'm sure we'll have some conversations coming up in a minute. I think I'm assuming that we're doing all right for time. We've just finished just on time, I think. Have we?
Thank you, Nelson. Yeah, that's wonderful. And I'm sure we've got plenty. We've got the Q&A and we're going to have some nice discussions there. So we can definitely cover anything else you want to squeeze in during that time as well. Thank you so much. And I absolutely love seeing the video. I loved seeing like live events and entertainment back and happening in our city. That to me, like goosebumps, like that is what our city is about, you know, doing what it does best. And I really thought that just that importance of understanding to have those development opportunities for young people, you know, absolutely fantastic that you're then being able to teach and give back and you're supporting the next generation. So really inspiring. Thank you so much. I'm now going to hand over to Josh, if you're with us and you're ready. Oh, you're on mute. Classic.
Oh, there we go. Right, there we go.
Thanks, Josh.
Slides up.
Look forward to hearing your lightning talk.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, everyone, for Always Possible for having me. As Joe said before, my name is Dr. Josh Siepel. I'm based at SPRU at the University of Sussex, but I spend a lot of my time at the moment working on something called the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center. Now, that's a big sort of fancy thing that sounds really impressive. What it really is it's based on a recognition that happened a couple of years ago, that fundamentally we collectively in the UK didn't know enough about the creative industries. And so I'll talk about what creative industries means in a moment, but creative businesses, we didn't know enough about creative things. We know that they have kind of intrinsic cultural benefits. We know there's also substantial economic benefits, but we didn't really know that much about them. And in order to be able to properly support these businesses and these creative sectors, the government, as part of the UK industrial strategy, launched something called the Creative Clusters Program, and funded this organization that I'm now working with, where we're trying to build a policy, an evidence base for policy making to better understand and better support the creative industries and creative business. And as an academic at Sussex University, I've been working on this for the past couple of years, and it's been really fascinating. So one of the things we've been doing on this is something that's been quite cool called Creative Radar. And this is one of the largest scale exercises that's ever been engaged to actually try to understand and map what's going on with creative businesses around the UK. Now, we did this using a number of different techniques. We used hundreds of thousands of scraped web pages. We scraped the content of web pages. We did a load of surveys. We did interviews. We did lots of different things trying to map what's going on. And what that's allowed us to do is generate some nice, pretty pictures around this. And one of the things that we've sort of realized, some of the insights that we've generated from this broader work, and this is work that sort of was originally pre-COVID, was something that we called microclusters. And the idea about microclusters is that we tend to think about places that are creative. We think, well, Brighton is a creative place. And indeed, Brighton is a creative place. But at the same time, within Brighton, which places are particularly creative? We know that there are places like the North Lane. There are other places like the Brunswick area. There's places around New England House and around there. And we've been trying to understand very small areas, kind of neighborhoods, on the basis that these neighborhoods may very well be a source, we now realize after the fact, a source and an area where resilience can happen, because that's where some of the real magic happens. And we mapped 700 of these microclusters around the UK, and we've been studying them. The really interesting thing is we started studying them just before the pandemic, and then we've been able to follow some of these companies through the pandemic to see what they've got up to. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about in our talk today. Now, particularly around some of this research that we've been doing, we know that COVID has had a huge impact on the creative industries. And I think, we don't have to look far in the introduction and everywhere else. It was not difficult to see, for those of us who are interested in creative and cultural organizations and spaces and businesses and things like that, the instant level of devastation. In the first instance, you've got venues closed, you've got festivals postponed and then canceled, you've got cinema releases that are pushed back and back and back, you've got customers who can't meet their clients, and all of these things that were going on. And so for this reason, there was a lot of concern, and indeed well-founded concern, that COVID could have a truly destructive effect on the creative industries in the UK. And in that context, we went and we surveyed a number of several hundred businesses that we'd contacted just before the recession, before the pandemic, to ask them how they'd got on. And these are some of the things that we found in our report. One of the key things that I think is really important to emphasize that we found is that the impact of COVID was highly uneven. And so whilst at the same time, when we think about creative businesses, yes, arts and culture had a very, very difficult time. And there were some real existential worries about the future of many arts organizations, up to the point when when the Treasury announced some targeted support for some of these businesses. But at the same time, in our study, we also found that some creative businesses did very well. The gaming sector had not necessarily, you wouldn't really say they had a good pandemic, but a situation where you've got lots of people at home created lots of new markets for people, for instance, in the gaming sector. And what we found was that the impact of COVID was very, very different across a lot of different sectors. So performing arts, one of the worst affected sectors like gaming, did relatively well. And so on that, we found the impact of COVID was highly uneven. And even within areas such as we saw with many businesses that were working with freelancers, lots of businesses, because all their work dried up, they worked with many fewer freelancers, but some grew and touched on their freelancers and drew on and used freelancers more and more reliably than they ever had before. And so one of the things that we realized is that the impact of COVID was uneven. At the same time, what we saw is that a lot of companies, in terms of how they responded to COVID, many companies responded to COVID with innovation. So we found in our national survey, in our national study, we found about 40% of businesses developed new products to reflect the changed marketplace as a result of COVID. A similar number started targeting new customers who they hadn't targeted before, often at a much broader range, selling globally or selling nationally where they'd only been selling locally. So there was a lot of things like this. About a third of companies in our sample invested more in R&D and innovative activities, trying to take advantage and trying to build up from these. And so my point in this is not to say that it's not been a near catastrophic crisis in a lot of cases, because indeed it was, but there were pockets of opportunity, there were pockets of resilience that we need to be aware of and see if we can learn from. Now, one of the things which is really interesting about that our findings showed about this is that, generally speaking, location didn't really matter as much about how companies responded to the pandemic. Now, this is important because when we look back to the last financial crisis at the end of the 2000s, one of the impacts that our Research and Policy and Evidence Center has shown is that what that recession and that financial crisis served to do was to really hammer creative businesses, particularly outside London. And so it really reinforced London's dominance as sort of the UK's largest creative hub at the expense of the regions. In the UK, during the pandemic, the factor which was more important here was sector. Can you open? Can you do what you normally do? As a result of the restrictions around businesses being able to open, being able to do things the way that they've normally done. So location wasn't as much of a factor in this. And so the challenges that companies in Brighton are facing, by and large, are the same that companies in Manchester are facing, same that companies in Bristol are facing, as in London, as in Edinburgh, across the board, and arguably possibly even around the world. And so, as I said before, some companies, they thrive through the pandemic. And one of the things which is very interesting that our research showed is that in the first year of the pandemic, including the first three, the three biggest lockdowns, relatively few companies actually failed. Fewer companies failed, went out of business in that time than you would have actually expected, which was quite a surprising fact. What that meant, though, is that as a lot of companies thrived through the pandemic, and then others were able to sort of keep their heads above water through the use of things like the furlough scheme. So we found about 2/3 of companies in our sample, of our national sample, had relied on furlough and had furloughed employees, which has proved to have a massive impact on the job situation, the employment, keeping these businesses going. The challenge that we face now, thinking about resilience, is that yes, okay, we're coming to, we hope, no one knows, we hope we're coming to the end of COVID. And we hope that this is going to be something that we're now sort of adjusting to whatever the new normal might possibly be. At the same time, there's a bit of a perfect storm that we now face with the lingering, ongoing remains of the COVID pandemic, the risk of new variants, but at the same time, things such as Brexit, also issues around the current situation with inflation, lack of consumer spending, issues around supply chains, and these challenges that are pervasive indeed across the entire economy are issues that I think are likely to be prevalent and things that we need to be thinking about for the creative industries and creative businesses now. And so I think in a lot of cases for many businesses, they were able to survive thanks to furlough and thanks to loans and other public support. Now, with all of those being phased out, the question is, what's going to happen now? And so this really speaks to the importance of trying to build up and supporting creative businesses through these times and helping companies over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, next year, to continue to weather what may be quite turbulent situations. Now, on one level, that's not exactly a cheery message, but at the same time, I think it's important for us to realize that this is a very complex time we live in. We are blessed stroke cursed to live in a very, very interesting, very complex time in history. And once we are aware of that, I think that puts us in a better position to understand what we can do to support and ensure that companies are more resilient going forward. Now, let's talk a little bit about Brighton specifically. So Brighton and Greater Brighton, which includes some of the areas outside. I mean, I think many, if not all of the people here will be quite familiar with Brighton as a cluster. Brighton, thinking about the figures that Joe mentioned at the beginning, Brighton is one of the most vibrant cities in terms of creative industries, and as a creative cluster, it's one of the most vibrant places in the UK for this. And it's characterized in particular by many, many more people sort of per capita working in areas such as performing arts and things like this than most other cities in the UK. And that helps to provide some of this really interesting, exciting resilience that makes Brighton as a city so interesting. At the same time, that and the fact that that Brighton is characterized by a lot of freelancers and a lot of people who may not have sort of the traditional kind of employee-employer work relationships, introduced a lot of challenges for the sector, and it meant that Brighton was more exposed, perhaps, than other parts of the economy. Now, with that said, one of the things that we found when we did a separate survey, which we did specifically looking at how companies in Greater Brighton had responded to the pandemic, one of the things that we found that was really, really interesting was that companies in Brighton performed virtually, the challenges that we saw nationally were almost identical to the challenges that were happening in Brighton. So there was very, very few differences. So in both cases, about 2/3 of businesses had said their operations were severely disrupted by COVID. But at the same time, about half of those companies had said that they'd substantially changed their business model. 40% said that they had launched new products in response to the pandemic. A similar number had said they'd managed to find new customers. So we see this real shift and this real push and these moves for resilience that were already happening as a part of the response to the pandemic in these areas. And the challenge that we have now is how to build on those and how to encourage those. And one of the things that we have been talking about in our research, and this is a map of the Greater Brighton area for those of you who aren't familiar with what exactly constitutes Greater Brighton. But as part of our research on these microclusters, which we are hypothesizing are sort of one of the sort of roots of resilience within creative clusters, we've identified about 10 microclusters around the Greater Brighton area. And of these, we found that these companies, particularly in the pandemic, tended to draw much more of their strength from their local connections. So they leaned into that community to try to give them kind of strength and support and connections to keep themselves going through the challenging times of the pandemic. And what we are hoping that we will be able to see, and what we're going to be looking for as we continue with our data collection over the next few years, is we are hoping to see the extent to which these companies, which were by and large sort of co-located and as part of these communities, even despite the disruptions from working at home and all of those things, are able to use this spirit and sense and the fact there's sort of something buzzing in the air in Brighton and all of this that those of us who are familiar with Brighton know and love. If that then can provide the basis for a recovery and provide the basis for new forms of resilience. Now, I mean, just to sort of summarize where we're going with this, as I've said, there are some real challenges that we're facing. You know, the broader environment across the whole of the economy is going to look to be very, very tricky. But at the same time, one of the things which, for me personally, as a researcher and as an academic, which I find really interesting in studying creative industries and creative businesses, is that yes, there's the economic side. And yes, we can study, you know, the economic stuff, which is interesting if you're an academic and a bit of a dork like me. But the thing which is also really powerful about this is that creative industries change lives. You know, the things that we do, you know, the books we read, the ideas that we engage with, you know, the stories that you know, break our hearts or inspire us, and all of those things, those come through these creative businesses, and all, you know, in the vast sort of array of everything that we see amongst businesses that draw on creativity. And so there's a really important role as we go forward for creative businesses thinking, you know, it's about resilience, and yes, it's about the economic side. At the same time, it's also about the inspirations rising to the challenges that we've seen, and trying to set out visions for what a more robust, a more fair, a more equitable, a more diverse world, more sustainable world might look like. And so this is the prospect, and this is the challenge, and this is where I think it's really important. Now that we know where we are, it sets the stage for us to think about what we can do and what might happen next. So on that note, just to kind of summarize some of my points here, COVID was very disruptive in creative industries, but it varied massively. It varied between sectors more rather necessarily than location. So how Brighton did was very similar to how the rest of the country did by and large. Some companies did well, others others struggled a little bit. And what we will be seeing now in our next rounds of data collections, we'll be able to see how that recovery has worked. Greater Brighton, I think, gives us a good microcosm of the issues that we face. But at the same time, we see the potential for creativity, creative businesses as part of rebuilding in a stronger and more resilient way. So I think I will stop there and can pass over to the next person, unless are we waiting on questions till the end?
Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Josh. Really fascinating results to research as well. Slightly different narrative than maybe one we think of in terms of that COVID survival and recovery. And I absolutely agree. It's all about what we can learn from that forced innovation that happened and how we can take that forward to help us be more resilient for the next upcoming challenges we might be facing. And I think that kind of leads us really nicely into Dave coming on to give us his lightning talk, to give us that perspective from Manchester and quite how the cultural sector in Manchester innovated and dealt with the challenges. So yeah, we'll hand over to Dave. That's right with you, Josh. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.
Dave, when you're ready.
Okay, so first of all, just a little bit about me. I've got two roles in Manchester. I'm, as you heard Joanna say at the beginning, I'm the Director and Chief Executive of Home, but I'm also seconded to the City Council and have been for the last 3 years, 1 day a week as Director of Culture for the city. And within that role, I'm responsible for policy and strategy. I don't have any relationship around funding or management of the big capital projects like Factory. But this builds on a number of years of working together in the city, which actually goes back to the early 1980s. So at the start of the pandemic, there was already some practice for us to be built on. I'll pick that up shortly. Just move. Yeah, that's it. So at the beginning, in January 2010, Manchester had the fastest growing economy of any city in Europe. And culture was a really important part of this. Now, I'm talking about culture here, not the broader creative industry. So these are the organisations, this is the economic footprint of 283 million of the organisations which the city partners with. But this doesn't include the design sector, fashion sector, et cetera, which is much bigger. We'd also started looking at using some DCMS metrics at the social value generated by the work we do. So it's like 8.7 million social value for culture. So the cultural sector was a really important part of the city's economy, of the city's social fabric. On the 17th of March lockdown, we just closed a show that previous Saturday. It was pretty devastating for all of us. We were worried that we might not get to the last night, but we did. A week later, the Cultural Leaders Group in Manchester, which was a meeting of all of the chief executives of the cultural organisations, met. We had been meeting monthly, but we agreed that we needed to meet weekly. And it's really interesting listening to what Nelson was saying about sharing to fortify, caring, listening, valuing, around that important for resilience, because we all felt immediately the need for that. And these are people who've been doing this role, have been working in culture for a long time. It's also interesting listening to what Josh was saying about the uneven impacts of the lockdown, but that it was nevertheless, there was very similar circumstances across the country. But we wanted to share intelligence, support each other, take action, and importantly, be a collective voice, because the city were trying to get feedback from all sorts of sectors very quickly. So we agreed on the weekly meetings, and that was to do those things. But it led us to identify that we needed a comprehensive recovery plan. And that was because we knew that economically and socially it was going to be, culture is important for the identity of the city. But we felt that particularly, and these are some of the things that I think Nelson was particularly highlighting about the role for culture in the recovery. I think Josh mentioned it also. We knew that we would do that, but finally we knew that we would be the last out of lockdown. And one of the things you may or may not know, but Manchester was, I think, the most lockdown city in the UK. So this turned out to be really, really true. So we developed a recovery strategy. I won't go into any great detail about it, but the thing is, we co-authored it as a sector, and then that was adopted by the city as policy. And so we did that through consultation. We managed to do it very quickly because of things like Zoom, etc. And there were 3 sections to it: stabilisation and quarantine. And that was about making sure that we stopped places going bust if we could do that. So that was about changing the council's funding requirements, people just not having to meet KPIs, etc. Then in the medium term, and the dates here ended up being a bit out, to be honest, because as we know that the lockdowns changed, but restart, repair, rethink. Again, we thought we needed to think about things differently to come out of this. And not come out to the same, because the same wasn't going to be acceptable anymore. And then finally, looking sort of longer term, the whole notion of unlocking, about how we get people back out into the city, into our institutions, etc. There were a number of things that came from this. First of all, the information sharing and moral support was absolutely priceless, because we felt we were working in the dark a lot, as I'm sure you did, with lack of information from government, trying to second guess things. We're all in different web forums, that sort of thing. So that's sharing, and moral support was really important. It meant that we got really strong support from the city council, because we got plumbed into and hardwired into the city council's policy infrastructure as a group of within the cultural sector, and we had a direct line into the business sounding board. So the city set up an independent body working with all the business leaders in the city to understand what the impact of the pandemic was and what they needed to be doing to come out of that. So it meant that we were sat at the table with people like the chief executive or the senior partner for KPMG in Manchester, head of the Court Bank, etc. And they were listening to what we had to say and about what the role that we would play in reopening the city centre once we got through it. And a more focused level, the Greater Manchester Artists Hub came out of this, and also the Greater Manchester Independent Artists Initiative. And these were about support for individual artists and freelancers, and looked at what we could do to support them, both just in terms of conversations, or even providing internet access, as a lot of people didn't have very good deals for getting online, etc. We participated in the interval research project nationally, and I think we were one of the first in, which meant that we got really good data to help us inform reopening. We provided seminars for small organisations and individual artists to help them bid to for Cultural Relief Fund, and in the end, it proved that we did very well with that. A lot of people got money from the CRF fund. There are a number of joint projects, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, but this was something that didn't happen elsewhere. So the Joint Audiences Project here for Culture, we all agreed, all the cultural organisations agreed that we would put a line in our CRF budgets, which we would then pool to support a marketing campaign to get people back into venues when we could reopen. And the venues that weren't eligible, the organisations that weren't eligible for CRF, also agreed to chip into that budget. And then we got match money from Marketing Manchester, which is our destination marketing organisation. And I'll show you a bit of a video about that shortly. We think we're the only place in the UK that did that. We took a similar approach to putting a line in our budgets, CRF budgets, which were pooled for MAID. MAID's our cultural education partnership. And we wanted to do this to support work in schools and continue to support education, albeit from a distance. This level of collaboration and the work that went on through the GM Artists Hub and the Independent Artists Initiative led to a hardship fund. A local philanthropist donated £250,000, which was matched by B&M bargains to support freelancers in the city. And then there's also another project, which was the Home Ground project, where we created an outdoor venue to share with other organisations when we were coming out of lockdown, but we knew we wouldn't be able to get into venue. So a number of things there. I'm just going to show you this video about the Joint Audiences project. Let's hope it works. So this campaign that I'm going to show you the video from as this reopens involved a significant number of organisations in the city, but altogether we had a pool of £500,000 to fund the campaign, and importantly, we took advice from the NHS, because Manchester's got the NHS has devolved in Manchester, about how we pitched this campaign to encourage people to participate in culture, because it was good for their recovery, as well as the recovery for the city and the economy. Right, here we go.
City that split the atom is ready to get back together.
The tables have turned. Let's dance on them again.
No time like the present to come look at the past. Back to the world beyond your four walls.
Old hobbies await and the new passion calls. Culture and art is this city's heart.
Welcome back, Manchester. It's time to restart.
New stories to share, new people to meet.
The interval's over. Get into your seats.
The time has come to turn the page. The world's your oyster. Manchester, your stage.
Let culture set you free.
Let culture set you free.
Let culture set you free. Let culture set you free.
Let culture set you free.
Let culture set you free.
Let culture set you free.
Let's culture set you free.
Okay, so that was the Joint Audiences campaign. There was another element to this, which is there's no video for, but there was also there's a big grassroots campaign. So we worked within our communities to reach people who might not see the social media side, etc. And that element, that grassroots element, is actually continuing as I speak, and will run through the next 12 months. You can see here from the slide, is the education project. I'm going to rush on here because I've taken up some time with that computer crash. But over 18 months, the numbers for this aren't massive, but the quality of engagement was significant and very useful and important. And it's laid some very important foundations for the future of our work within the education sector. And we're looking, as part of our next step, well, I'll come to that actually later on, I'll talk about that later. I've got another video for you now, which I'll let you play. This is about home ground. Sorry about that. The thing about the home ground project is the list of programme partners there. The idea was to give profile to organisations which couldn't open because of COVID security. And the other thing I would point out, by the way, is that socially distant spaces look half empty. So actually, we did attract 50,000 visits, to almost 50,000 visits to the venue, but you wouldn't be able to tell that from that video. Okay, so going forward, we've learned quite a lot about this, particularly around collaboration. And that we had a conversation about what the priorities were, and that we felt were for the cultural sector, but also for the city. And there's a list of them there. And in order to take that forward, we did a reboot of the recovery plan to take a longer term view. Nevertheless, there were still some short term challenges. So there was the round 3 of the Cultural Recovery Fund that we were looking at. We still need to keep sharing knowledge as we were running through the reopening of organisations. We still need to be flexible with our funding arrangements with arts organisations, and there were quite a few smaller organisations which hadn't been able to reopen that needed our help and advice. But longer term, there were 6-7 areas that we looked at around building the recovery strategy for the city on the basis that it would take a long time. Promotional activity, work with children and young people in schools, network development support, events, skills, innovation, etc. I'm going to whiz through these very quickly on the basis that I'm sure you can get the slides afterwards, rather than spend a bit of detail on them, and happy to take questions later. But promotional activity, there's a lot. We're going to continue with the joint working across the cultural sector, and with the NHS. But noticeably, the Culture Awards, which we held last November, was a celebration of everything that was going on in the city, right across the sector, and it was a joyous moment to come together to celebrate what what the cultural sector has achieved and what we've done with each other and with our citizens. And those moments of party, I think Nelson was saying, are really important. I would agree with that. Children and young people, we're going to really build on MAID, and that again is going to be a joint element of the cultural sector's NPO applications as we go into the next round. Network development, the Cultural Leaders Group was what it said. It just came together as a group of people. We feel as we come out of this, we need a more democratic cultural consortium that's much more widely representative of the broader cultural sector. So we commissioned a piece of work last year to look at that, and now we're looking to, well, we're in the process of implementing that, building this new cultural consortium. But alongside of that, there's things like Music Cities Network, which we're part of, and the Northern Culture Network, which is a consortium of consortia across the north of England. Stimulus programme, all sorts of different things we're working on there. But the key thing here was it was about creating an events commission for the city. And this is a public-private sector partnership about how we bid for and attract and manage large events in the city centre and make sure we're not programming event on top of event. Stimulus programme around workforce development and business growth. We're working with the Growth Company, which is the Greater Manchester Training Agent, well, Growth Economic Development Agency, but there's a skills element to it. We're really building on Factories Academy Consortium, which is a consortium of cultural organisations working with Factory, which opens next year, around training. We learned a lot coming together around the Kickstart apprenticeships last year. We were able to host a lot of those. There's a whole host of things there we're working on, but we're pulling together a workforce development plan for across the city to look at where we can help and support those things. Around innovation, I think Josh was saying about the importance of innovation during the pandemic. We need to build on that. Within Manchester, there are 5 universities, and as well as that, we've got a very creative sector, as I know you have in Brighton. But there's some really important networks that we've been working on around health, around low carbon, etc. And finally, we feel we need a capital investment strategy to underpin some of that. So there's a whole host of things around that. But I think I should probably stop there, or I'm going to overrun. There we go.
Thank you, Dave. It sounds like you've got a lot to keep yourself busy with in the next few years. I absolutely loved it. Your example of the collaborative joint audience campaign is just fantastic, and I'd love to see more of that happening here in Brighton between our cultural organisations. And I think it's exactly that actually one thing that came out of the pandemic was that our cultural organisations have had the opportunity to work more closely with our local councils and other businesses, like you were saying, like talking to the other high street businesses about how you're bringing back culture for the city centre as well. And another point that you brought up was viewing culture from the perspective of the NHS and health and well-being, and understanding how important it is to our health and well-being. Another speaker from our last Igniter event was talking about that for the Old Market venue in Brighton in their in their talk last week, or the week before perhaps. And I think that's really relevant and something that we need to all sort of identify going forward, which I think links us nicely to Sophie, who maybe might have a touch on our well-being and looking after ourselves and sense of self coming out of the pandemic. Perhaps, Sophie, maybe I'm on the right lines.
Hopefully.
And I'll hand over to you.
I mean, I joined the Royal Air Force when I was 16 years old, and I'm pretty sure, like most people over the years, I never had the chance to stop and think. And when the pandemic hit, it was like someone hitting pause on the world. This was an opportunity to stop and think and decide where we were going to go going forwards. But unfortunately, most people were just thinking about when they were going to get back to normal. And I don't know about you, but for me, normal was broken. Normal was me struggling to pay my rent every month. Normal was me not being able to find enough of a work-life balance that I could fuel my soul at the same time as I was working. So when the pandemic hit, within 24 hours of that first lockdown, all of my work just stopped. All of my work speaking at conferences all over Europe just went. I had my first ever stand-up tour of the country booked. Yep, that went. And it's like, well, what am I going to do now? Everyone's going, oh, I can't wait to get back to normal. I just, and people were just waiting for something to happen. And it's like, I can't afford to just sit and wait for something to happen. So because I'm a mental health campaigner and speaker and writer, I decided, you know what, I need to go and see if I can help out. And I became a mental health support worker. It gave me an opportunity to still be busy. It gave me an opportunity to help people. It gave me an opportunity to grow my knowledge about something that I speak and write about. One of the things that the pandemic did was it just utterly destroyed all of the belief we had in things that were constant, things that were solid, that would be there forever. All of a sudden, all of the constants were replaced with uncertainty. We didn't know when we'd be able to see people again. We couldn't just go out and see our friends. We couldn't visit our relatives. There was so much uncertainty in the world, and that was just fueled by so much mixed messaging from the government and from other organisations. It seemed like the rules changed every single week, day, hour. Nights out became nights in, quite often alone. I mean, I'm a single person. I live on my own. All of a sudden, all of my time when I wasn't at work, I was on my own. In fact, during the pandemic, I won the British LGBT Award for outstanding contribution to LGBT life. And the previous year, I'd been at the award ceremony, drinking and partying, and I got to meet I can't remember his name. Lily Savage, him. Amazing people and amazing speeches. But when I won it, I was sat in my home, all on my own, in the dark and the cold. And, you know, I just felt So I couldn't even share it with anyone because the awards were pre-recorded, weren't even going out for a couple of days. So it was just heartbreaking to receive this amazing award, and yet it just didn't feel like it had even happened, because for me, it almost felt like without the emotional connection, did it really happen? In lockdown, we literally put into isolation. And when you think about the fact that in the prison system, isolation is actually used as a punishment. So for us to suddenly be isolated away from family, friends, was very hard for so many. We lost our social networks. And because of that, we had to start building new support networks that would enable us to discover new technologies like this, where we could talk to people all over the world. Working from home, all of a sudden there was a need for self-reliance, a need for self-discipline, and the need for self-care, because as freelancers, we all know that it's very difficult to blur those lines between work time and personal time, and some people work too much, some people didn't put in anywhere near enough work during the working from home stage. But it was something that we all had to learn how to deal with. When I first got to go back to schools, I remember the first talk that I did in front of a live audience for a couple of years, and I was stood at the school and I'm on a stage, socially distanced from the audience, and I said to them, what did you miss most during the lockdown? And it was a public school, they were quite posh. One of the boys put his hand up and said, restaurants. And I said, yeah, great answer, yeah. And then this young lady put her hand up and said, friends. And I turned around to the guy and said, there are no right or wrong answers, but she got the right one. And that's the thing. So many people realize that actually the thing they miss most wasn't going out. It wasn't going to restaurants. It wasn't the ability to go shopping. It was that they missed their friends and family. During that time, materialism seemed to mean less to us. Human contact became the most valuable commodity that any of us could have. A life without people showed us the importance of community. And it was really important that we all pulled together and looked out for each other, because so many of us were in danger of slipping through the cracks. For me, I used it as a total reset on my life. I gave notice on my dream flat that I lived in that overlooked the sea, because where my business went, I was struggling to pay the rent. It was Mick with the lifestyle that I had. So I moved out of my beautiful dream flat and moved into a converted horse box and travel around the South Downs. That allowed me to reconnect to nature, something that I didn't even realize that I didn't have. I grew up in the village. I grew up in nature, and just the ability to reconnect with nature just allowed me to breathe again in a way that I couldn't when I was stuck in the middle of a town. I used that time to get clean. Again, it was something where I needed that separation between myself and my previous life. By going out into nature, by getting clean, by using this as an opportunity to step away from the life before, I could breathe, I could think, and I could work on my mental health. Now, I'm someone who first struggled to, first tried to take their own life when they were 12 years old. Over the years, I've struggled with my gender identity, I've struggled with depression, self-harm, suicide, post-traumatic stress. And I can honestly say that last year, even with the lockdowns and everything else, was the first year since I was 12 years old when I didn't think about suicide once, because I'd managed to find something that fueled my soul rather than just fueling my bank balance, fueling my head. And it allowed me to move forwards with my life. At Whitehawk Football Club, we've got a great sense of community, and we all feel that we're part of a family. We all feel that we're there contributing to something that is bigger than ourselves. And I think that that is a vital thing that all of us need. It's not about us, it's about what we can do for the greater good. And when you're doing stuff for the greater good, it actually feeds back to you and it fulfills your soul. I think it's important that looking forwards, we don't think about building a new normal. I think it's much more important that we think about building a new extraordinary. And that's my message. Thanks.
Caught me out there. Thank you, Sophie. That's fantastic. And I think you've really summed up exactly what we've seen, this sort of line through everyone's talks today about that fortifying of resilience coming from network and coming from community, and not from doing it alone, but doing it together. So I think that was a great summary of today's talks. Now, if everyone's happy, I'd love to move over to the question and answer section of the session, if that's okay. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. If anyone wants to add any more as we go along, as things come up, please do. But I will start with, and I've just seen the chat that Esther says, I love the idea of the new extraordinary. That's really nice. So I've got a couple of questions in the chat that we could get started with if people are happy to, and I'm really glad that they've come up because they actually cross over with some questions that I had prepared. But the first question was, and I will say perhaps I can kind of focus this towards Nelson and Josh at the beginning, and then if anyone else wants to come in, they can do. But do you have any thoughts on how young people like the ones that Nelson works with can be connected to those micro clusters and supported to be the ones who create new micro clusters? So I don't know if Josh and then maybe Nelson want to come in on that.
Sure, thank you. No, I mean, I think that's a really important point, and it's a really important question because it speaks to this, the kind of the crossover between the benefits that you see from these groupings that are, these communities, which are so important from a perspective of creating resilience, because it's work, but it's also personal, and it's bringing those things together. And I think it's something that we're wearing my researcher hat. It's something that we're still looking at, and we're still trying to understand. I mean, I think one of the things that I would say that I think is important there is I think space is really important. Having spaces. I think Nelson's discussion when he was talking about his studio and having it be a place where people just come in and people are talking and they're learning from each other and things like that. That stuff's really important. And I think that's something, having spaces like that, and it can be studios, it can be pubs, it can be shared workspaces, it can be any number of things, but having those places where ideas are exchanged, where people learn, where people are able to start developing and understanding what's going on around them, I think is really important. I think that's a really important part of this, and I think that's a kernel of how these communities get created and maybe start to get established.
Definitely. I don't know, Nelson, if you want to add any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's like there's a lot of potential for if you're a firm, if you're someone providing a solution, which most businesses are, when you're doing that and it's something that can integrate with the lifestyle of young people, because young people are some of the biggest consumers, actually, not necessarily of paid content, but of unpaid products, but they definitely are massive consumers and very aware. So if you're a company that is providing something that young people can engage in and you bring it to them and kind of, as was mentioned earlier today, you show interest in them, you'll really start, you engage them, and then all of a sudden it's like you can see people's attention start to pivot. So it's, I really think it's about approaching, it's about taking it to someone and saying, we have a new product that we think can benefit young people, going somewhere like Audioactive, or someone like even schools and colleges, and doing outreach. I think when you do the outreach, you can really be amazed with what comes back, because young people want to do stuff, they're bored. We're bored, we're sat there and we want to do something interesting. So yeah, I think I don't mean to tie all young people with the same brush and say we're all bored, but yeah, I think it's a really, really powerful thing, and it sows some brilliant seeds for the future.
Absolutely. And I have a note here from the Always Possible team where we're thinking about young people, and the fact that it was on a podcast that we did the other day that someone was saying that, you know, we've got a generation of 18-year-olds who've never been out to nightclubs, never been out to shows or events. And in terms of those generations coming through, working in the creative sector, you know, will they consider it too risky? You know, have these experiences, do you think it's maybe put off the younger generation coming into those kind of job roles and seeing it as a future opportunity for business? I don't know what you might think about that, Nelson, and or perhaps Dave with the MADE educational program that you've been running.
It's kind of my it's feeling that those things are universal. Entertainment is universal. There will always be a place for entertainment in human culture, and it might be scarier now to jump into roles that involve, as a young person, say I want to go and put on events. But I think there's also a converse side to that, where it's like, having been deprived of events for so long, there's an intense hunger and also an awareness of the need and the role that those, you know, the absence makes the heart grow fonder, and where we haven't, you know, people who maybe were looking forward to going into nightclubs on their 18th birthday then weren't allowed to do that. Now the appeal is, the thirst is larger. So I think, and I'm sure Dave has other stuff to add on this, like I think there's always going to be, I think it's one of the, it's a universal constant that there are always going to be places to go and people who want to be entertained and people who want to entertain. I think that's innately human. And I think we can look forward to that for a long, long time to come, no matter what life throws at us.
What Nelson said, actually, it's right on the money as far as I'm concerned. I mean, just on young people specifically, I mean, there's the great resignation, as it's been called, that's taking place across the world, but certainly in UK, is leading to some massive recruitment crises across the cultural and creative industry sector. And what that's revealing is the lack of investment in the talent pipeline coming through. And we've got to play some catch up on that pretty quickly, actually, if we to stay competitive, I think, in global markets, but more importantly, if we to still provide that sort of service that we provide to our communities. And so I think that's a big challenge. And I think Josh quite rightly pointed out that the real difficulty, if we thought it was bad for the last 2 years, the next few years are going to become really challenging. You know, local authorities, for example, know what the budget is next year. The 2 years after that, everybody's going to be involved in big cuts. So, you know, Manchester's got £80 million worth of cuts the following 2 years, having already been on the receiving end of £450 million worth of cuts. So it's a challenge for everybody, and that's where we need to step in, I think, where we can.
I don't know, Josh, if you've got any further thoughts on how some of the businesses you've been talking to are considering those challenges.
I mean, I think it's tricky. I think it's yet to be seen. I you know, for a lot of, or for some of the businesses that we've been speaking to, you know, you deal with the crisis of today rather than the crisis of tomorrow, in a sense. And I think that's one of the issues that, you know, that we see now. Is I think that now that we hope that COVID might be retreating into the rearview mirror, that then all of these other issues that we're aware of, I think will then increasingly be coming to the fore. And, you know, what shape responses will take to that, and the types of resilience that businesses will need to deal with these challenges are potentially quite different from the resilience that businesses might need to respond to COVID. It's a completely different type of set of challenges, and I think we need to be aware of that and be aware that there's going to be a lot of flexibility required to deal with that and to help businesses to succeed and to thrive over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Absolutely, and I think sort of what's been highlighted today is that with the working together and also trying to be more strategically involved with different sectors, with different businesses, to see what they're doing, to see how we can support each other. will hopefully help us swing those challenges when we reach them. But I've got a great question in the chat, thinking about how we can learn from other sectors. Maybe Sophie, you want to pick up on this one. Is there anything the cultural sector can learn from football in terms of the talent pipeline?
You know what? I'm just going to say no. I think that both sectors struggle with bringing new talent through. I think that I think that there's so many ways in which the but both the arts, culture, and football, that they're very similar beasts, but they're also incredibly different. I think that there's just a general lack of investment in training, a lack of opportunities for young people, and I think that sort of moving forwards, we need to think about that. We need to maybe get some more training in place, but at the same time, don't forget those oldies out here. I mean, I recently had a birthday which took me up into the age bracket below the top one. So the only age bracket above mine now is the one that goes and over. So now I'm officially really old. It's really difficult for people of my age to talk to people about positions, because you know what, we've reached a stage where people don't want to employ us. So I think there's issues with getting young people into industries, but I think there's also issues with industries like the rest of our Western culture being so youth focused that it sort of forgets that there's people out there with talent and experience that might be old enough to remember Margaret Thatcher. Heaven forbid.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And what was I thinking? It's actually, we're talking about the fact that we're going to be needing to fill more roles in the industry, and it's that the development is not just about young people, but also being able to transition roles. And I think what the pandemic showed us was so many people went and found new jobs in completely different sectors because they had to. They were, they were forced into other positions. But it just shows you that it can be completely acceptable at any age to retrain.
But I think the thing.
Oh, sorry, go
on. That retraining and that reskilling, re-industrying that happened during the pandemic is, it always seemed to be in a downward direction. I don't think that, I didn't see much evidence of people managing to sort of move up the scale of jobs. It was, I mean, like the government's campaign with the ballet dancer. It's like, well, have you thought about becoming a cleaner? It's like, really? Okay, yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, really positive message. But yeah, I think it's always going to be easy for people to move down the skill ladder, but I think there's still difficulties in people moving up it.
Absolutely. So some focus on training and development to upskill people whilst they move across and up the ladder as well would be a really beneficial outcome of this, I guess. Absolutely. I'll head to another question in the chat. So we got from in the question and answers, we got, what's one piece of advice Dave would give Brighton and Hove as the city recovers from the pandemic? So one kernel of advice.
Blimey. I wouldn't presume as to give Brighton any advice because it's a great city. It's got a fantastic personality. It's also got one of the best veggie restaurants I've ever been in my life. But it's a great place. What I'm happy to say is about what there are a couple of things that I think we've learned that it might be worth you considering to see whether they're useful for Brighton. And one of them is that collaboration has to be a broad base. It can't simply be the big players, or it can't simply be the smaller players, because we live in a complex environment, a complex ecology, and if you miss a piece out of it, then the rest of it starts to fall over. We've learned something about that. We haven't got it right yet. We've got more to do. But that I think investigate that, because I was on holiday in Brighton in November actually, and it was the complexity of the environment of the city. I really noticed. I think that's the biggest thing I would say. That I think we've learned that you might want to consider.
Absolutely. And in the chat, it now says, Dave, I'm now interested in which veggie restaurant you went to in Brighton.
Terra.
Oh, very nice. Yes. Very good. I've got another question in the chat. So what is one of the most, to the panel, so let me know if you want to put in an answer to this, what is one of the most innovative things or business ideas you've seen during the pandemic? What's the extraordinary that you've seen or experienced?
Can I say something there? For me, I think that the thing that I saw that I found extraordinary was David Tennant and Michael Sheen doing the stage productions, because that was just so totally out of the box. It's like, okay, we can't perform in theatres, we can't even get together with a film crew. Let's just produce art just by talking to each other on Zoom, and I think that they created a whole new genre of entertainment, and the fact that they're both supremely talented and wonderful people sort of really helps as well.
Absolutely. Does anyone have any other extraordinary examples? Okay, well, hopefully we'll have, well, maybe that's our homework, to go out and look for those extraordinary examples. Sorry, go on, Dave.
I think that there were some big flashy things that I saw, but for me, the things that were the most important were the incremental changes that some people made, and because they're going to be the longest lasting ones. So those the sort of way that contact theatre. Contact, as they call now, they're called contact theatre, switched to the way they were engaging, working with young people, and the intensity with which they did that, and the support they gave was just awe-inspiring, brilliant, and worth seeing. I'm more in the evolution rather than revolution camp, I think, as the revolution's never happened yet.
That's very true.
I definitely think there's some really, coming from the entertainment sector, I think I saw a lot of pivots towards, there's a massive pivot from in-person and live experiences to virtual experiences, and some fantastic ideas for interacting with people. I saw a lot of artists that I was big fans of using live streams to, like, I think anyone who was into art, live art, probably heard of a live stream at some point over the last 2 years, and just some really creative ways of doing that. People taking their whole band into a studio, doing, they've released an album, they can't do a tour, and so they do their whole live show in a studio live, and are interacting with people through the chat in between songs, and it's a massive production, running donations. I saw people doing quarantine radios and Instagram live, and generating and breaking world records for the number of people tuned into one live stream on Instagram, just because they regularly, every day or every other day, were inviting celebrities. And again, the crucial nature of it was a collaboration. They were inviting other celebrity friends to come and talk, and the cross-pollination of these things, and the candidness, it's probably not a word, the candidity of the conversations that were being had. It created this pivot towards access, and this pivot towards, we're all stuck in our own homes. So the access of, we're not going to go to a show, we're not going to go to a live experience, but we're going to access these storytellers that we're really big fans of, but we can access them doing exactly what we're doing, which is being at home with themselves. And then it opens up a new kind of window and a new angle for fans and followers and fan bases and audience members to have proximity to their idols, to the storytellers that they love. And I think there's some really, really great examples of that, of just people interacting with their fan bases and giving value to their fan bases through digital means. I think it's really, really powerful in that time.
Just on that note, you didn't get to talk about it earlier, Tell us about your event you've got coming up that you've released today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd love to. I have a little, let me throw up a little photo here. Yeah, we just announced it was today. It's on the 15th of April. This is me and my beautiful, wonderful sister Eden. We both played at the event I showed you guys a video of. And we're going back to the same venue with some new spacey decor, new music, and yeah, and just a fantastic time. So come, you know, if you're in Brighton and or you're close enough to Brighton that you fancy seeing some great music, Dave, I'll get you a train ticket, don't worry. I'm sure it's not expensive from Manchester. I'm sure it's only pennies. Yeah, you know, it's great to see anyone there. If you're a fan, if you like, you know, just fun-loving music, this will probably be up your street. But yeah, thanks for putting that out as well.
Fab, I'm glad we managed to get that in. Josh, you had your hand up.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just gonna, there was a sort of a follow-up question in the chat that was about, which I kind of wanted to touch on, which is the question of, you know, will this last? And I think what Nelson's saying is really important in that, you know, by necessity, a lot of people, particularly on the, if you're going to be kind of gruesome about it, the content side, people who are, you know, the performing arts and culture and everything else, you know, people had to really think about what does it mean to have a relationship with people. And I think, you know, we don't know yet, because I think, you know, we haven't yet reached the, you know, nostalgia for lockdown phase, because everyone's so happy to be out now. But at some point, then you know, I think there will be some type of equilibrium to this. And, you know, there's really innovative ways that creators are being able to engage with fans and with supporters and with people who are interested. And I think, you know, I think it will have, like, now what shape it will take, I don't know, but I think, you know, I think some of these things are here to stay. And I think the other thing, I mean, one of the kind of interesting examples that I was reflecting on was something like the National Theatre, which famously kind of shifted and was having a lot of, you know, previous sort of archived productions they were selling as live streams and things like that. But it creates this entire realm of opportunities for people to engage with stuff now, as well as things in the past, and to build those relationships going forward, which again, it provides the seeds for some of this resilience that we've been talking about.
Absolutely, I definitely agree. Dave, you've also got your hand up. I don't know if you wanted to come in on that or the comment before.
Well, it's both actually. Just to refer to the last question about online and will it stay, I think it depends on whether the revenue streams are there. There's one of them. One question we don't know about. I'm already seeing people a bit more of a focused approach to online streaming, etc., which is more about reaching audiences that are not coming back. But there is a high demand for being in the same space as other people from a social point of view, I think. And then the other point about innovation, and it may or may not be innovative, I don't know. But I just remembered something that I saw. I dropped off social media in 2020 because it became a poisonous place that I didn't want to engage in. But a colleague did share with me a thing called Twitter Disco, which was a program for people who are carers, and who so not only were they in lockdown, but they were caring for somebody, and there was serious isolation going on there. So on a Friday night, they used to get together on Twitter and have a disco in their kitchens together, sharing tracks, etc. I know because I got invited through Home to do an evening of songs from the shows as part of this Twitter Disco thing. It was pulled together by Dr. Ruth Bromley in Manchester. That was a really fascinating, brilliant and heartwarming and wonderful place to be. And that for me was the sort of innovation I'm interested in and enjoy.
Absolutely, and that brings us back to fortifying it through community, being the online community as well. I think that's really what we've underlined today, is that there is room for innovation, and we can take what we've learned and used it to strengthen us in the upcoming challenges, but the big part of it is working together, collaborating, finding our community and supporting our community will keep us going strong, hopefully. I think that's all the questions that we've got in the chat and the Q&A. So I just wanted to round up today's session, if that's okay with you guys, unless you've got anything else you'd like to add. I think, you know, it's been a fantastic discussion. So we've got 2 more Igniter events taking place coming up in March. The first one will be on the 2nd of March, and it's titled Compassionate, Creative or Commercial: How Sustainable Business Models and Socially Focused Creative Practice Can Combine in and Outside of Greater Brighton. And on the 16th of March, we'll be looking at clusters, communities and co-working spaces. So clearly, Josh, will have to get you back for that. Considering how Greater Brighton's creative ecosystems can work together and find what they need to thrive in the 21st century. So I'm sure that we'll be putting the links to those 2 events to register in the chat right now. I'm sure Annie-Marie is probably doing that at the moment for you. So join us, come be part of our community, keep the conversation alive. And I just wanted to say finally, on behalf of the ABCD Cultural Recovery Fund and Always Possible, thank you again to Sophie, to Josh, to Nelson and Dave for taking the time to talk to us today and sharing all your experiences. It's been absolutely fantastic. And thank you to everyone who put their questions and discussion in the comments as well and fed into today's talk. And yeah, we'll see you back in a couple of weeks' time on the 2nd of March. Thank you, everyone.